Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Ravens-Packers joint practices could be a tease of a Super Bowl matchup. It could also be a harbinger of preseasons to come. Also, Anthony Richardson wraps up his first full preseason with the Colts, and the Packers are taking the next step with their receiving core. Today's episode brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Green Bay Packers and Baltimore Ravens squared off in Green Bay in what could be a potential Super Bowl preview. And we got competing reports on how it went, of course, because we didn't get to see it. This is not something that fans get to see. Kevin Ostreicher from Locked On Ravens joins me now. And Kevin, the NFL has moved, teams have moved to more of these joint practices as ways of getting their teams ready to play. And it's really the only time in really the last 10 years since we went to this condensed preseason and all of the subs that are now playing in preseason that we would get a matchup of two Super Bowl caliber teams going ones versus ones. Do you think this is an evolution that is for the greater good of the NFL?
I think it is. It's a better way to kind of do certain things. Obviously, it is not game action. I think that is the thing that probably is going to be lost with less and less stars, less and less starters playing in the preseason. But Isaiah Likely, the Ravens tight end, talked about it after practice on Thursday, saying that, with guys not playing, it's just a good opportunity to be able to go out there and get good work in against really talented teams. I would say that the Ravens, from their perspective specifically, ever since their 2021 season in the preseason where they played their starters for one series and J.K. Dobbins tore his ACL.
Yeah.
And then a couple days later, Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards tore their ACLs in practice. And ever since then, they have been really cautious. I think most teams are taking the cautious approach. And then you see teams like Kansas City who are playing their starters in preseason with tune-ups, but Marquise Brown goes down. I believe that was the first play of the preseason with a shoulder injury that might keep him out for week one. So I think it is a less intense, but you still get a lot of the work because you're going 7-on-7, you're going 11-on-11, you're still getting that work, and it's just not in the stadium packed action, game action type of deal. So I think that with the joint practices, this is kind of the way the NFL is going. What I'm curious about, though, Peter, is are those going to become condensed? Because we used to see multiple days of joint practices.
Yeah.
But now this Ravens-Packers obviously was only one day, a little bit condensed. So how does the evolution of that look like is the next question to me.
Well, and I guess this to me is leading to, are we just going toward a place where we have no preseason and teams are saying this is actually the best way to do this? Let's have joint practices, even if it is 2 days. And the Packers and Ravens go at it for 2 days. Last week, the Packers played the Broncos and they got a joint practice and then the game. Does it actually make more sense from a team development standpoint to do 2 joint practices and no games? But then you're hurting the fans. And I guess I'm wondering if this is leading us to a place where the NFL, an entertainment product, is making a decision, a rare decision, by the way, to say this is actually to the betterment of our team. It hurts our fans. And that the only reason we still have preseason games is because you and I are sickos and we're going to watch.
No, you know we're going to watch. And I think that there are multiple ways. It's a good point. There are multiple ways I think that could go. I think if the NFL eliminates the preseason altogether, they might want to compensate by adding another regular season game. And that would
there's no doubt if that's what they do. That is going to be the trade-off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So they take away the preseason, they add the regular season game, and then we probably see either just a longer joint practice schedule or multiple per team per year, or maybe they dock it to like 2 preseason games and they have 2. So each team that you play a preseason game against, you also have a joint practice with, because I also think, and I go back to this example all the time, I believe it was 2017 for the Ravens, but these young guys also need opportunities to prove themselves in game action, where I know a lot of teams rely on the preseason to, obviously you'll have your camp standouts. You'll have guys that, perform exceptionally during practice, but games are obviously it's a different ball game. So Michael Pierce, who obviously has made a very long and successful career for himself, was not on the Ravens roster.
Now a lucrative career.
Yes. Heading into that fourth preseason game was against the Saints. I remember they went down to New Orleans. Michael Pierce was not on anybody's roster. He had the game of his life, stuck his way onto the 53-man, and now look where he is. So I think that it's important for the fans. It's important for the younger guys, undrafted players trying to make names for themselves. But obviously, as you mentioned, Peter, you can't kind of sweep under the rug. It's an entertainment product. And that's kind of where the NFL is going to make most of their decisions. And so I wouldn't be shocked if maybe they dock it down to 2 and then eventually we get to no preseason and they add that extra regular season game in there.
I also wonder quickly here, Kevin, we've seen these teams now more and more, and the Packers kind of started this with their family night. They had a practice, 60,000 people are at Lambeau Field for a practice, and they televise it, and they televise it locally only. I just wonder if we're headed toward a time when, like, that's what a preseason game is now, where it's a joint practice. Like we'd see Packers and Ravens. It's a joint practice at Lambeau Field, and we all get to see it. We all get to be a part of it. And maybe that is the best thing for everybody. The fans still get to see the players, but the teams get to have a controlled environment where they get to ratchet up the intensity a little bit. Like there's going to be a game type atmosphere in a situation like that.
Yeah, and the Ravens I believe they streamed most of their joint practice with the Commanders last year down in Owings Mills. So we could already be moving to something like that where I think fans would be okay with it. Because I think really, Peter, the cycle of NFL offseason starting at training camp is like everybody's so excited for training camp. And then a week goes by and everyone's like, all right, I'm done with this. Let's move on. And then first preseason game, everyone's like, oh, I'm so excited for the preseason. Let's go. First preseason game happens. All right, I'm done with this. We're done. Let's just get the regular season. Yeah. So could it be like one preseason game, one like joint practice extravaganza, and then they're in the regular season? I think obviously that would place more emphasis on practice and that being more important. But I don't think we're watching the final form of preseason as it is right now.
Stay up to date on the Baltimore Ravens all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Ravens on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, Anthony Richardson and the Colts took a final crack at preseason ball against the Bengals. Before we get to that, though, the Seattle Mariners are about to make some big changes. Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets. Are you sensing a theme? Tickets. Right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. I went seats, not tickets. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app and get new users. They can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Seattle Mariners are in the midst of an epic collapse. What was once a 10-game lead has fallen all the way down to a 5-game deficit in the AL West behind the surging Houston Astros. According to reports, Seattle is expected to fire manager Scott Service after wasting an exciting start to the season. Service is just one of 3 managers with an above 500 record in club history, helping break the Mariners' 21-year postseason drought in 2022. And speaking of the Astros, they kicked off a 4-game series with the Orioles.
I'm here to focus on Spencer Arrighetti, Shea Whitcomb, Ben Gamel, huge his first 2 RBIs of 2024, Eric. He didn't have a single RBI in New York. Well, I'm just saying, look, he bust on the scene in 2017. He was a prospect that people said, well, hey, this is a guy that's probably going to do something. He had a really solid rookie campaign and he hasn't done much since then. Baseball is a very hard sport. Alex Bregman played. We'll talk about the Gremlins later. Not the movie, but the Gremlins in his elbow, which may cause some frustration because it doesn't seem like a spot is too happy that Jordan's having to play left field every game in Baltimore. He just didn't seem too thrilled about it. But great game, Eric. You got Corbin Burns on the mound. You just lost the last 2 games to Boston. You go on the road. You're like, how is this going to go? And what did I tell y'all? Everything's going to be all right. We're road warriors, baby. We are road warriors.
The Washington Commanders are trading 2022 first-round pick receiver Jahan Dotson in the division to the Philadelphia Eagles for a third-round pick. Did Howie Roseman do it again?
Well, we've been saying for a month the Philadelphia Eagles needed to trade for a wide receiver 3. The best case scenario just played out. The Eagles are sending a 2025 third-round pick and 2 seventh-round picks for Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders, a former first-round pick out of Penn State. The Eagles also getting back a 5th rounder. To me, this is a steal. If you look at the stats, they're not sexy for Dotson, a little over 500 yards in back-to-back years. But to me, this is a guy that has elite potential as a separator, both in the slot and on the outside. His potential has not been able to be met in Washington with that quarterback carousel. He fell out of favor with the Commanders, but I think this is a high upside move. Dotson comes in, way less pressure. The perfect complement to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. We were listing off 1,000 options at receiver for the Eagles to trade for. Dotson I thought of, but didn't think the Commanders would trade in the division, and here we are.
In Miami of Ohio, head coach Chuck Martin believes that Alabama stole one of their players. That's right. Alabama stole a Miami of Ohio player. Redhawks kicker Graham Nicholson entered the transfer portal and committed to the Crimson Tide this offseason. Martin claimed that the Tide illegally recruited and stole Miami's kicker in a recent interview. Alabama head coach Kalen DeBeer responded to the allegation, saying he didn't know what Martin was referring to and that Alabama did everything they were supposed to do. Recruiting, it's always above board, right? We wouldn't expect anything to be untoward about it. Anthony Richardson and the Colts squared off against the Cincinnati Bengals without Joe Burrow and a complement of starters. Locked On Colts host Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks shared their thoughts on Richardson's first full preseason in Indy.
Big one for the Colts, obviously. Lots to take away. Anthony Richardson is obviously the big talking point here. Had a bit of an up and down day, kind of a perfect opening drive for the Colts. 12 plays, 80 yards, took over 6 minutes off the clock. So just going off of that, you think it's going to be a great day, right? But so the Colts go down the field, put 7 points on the board. A.D. Mitchell's first touchdown of his career. So everyone's riding high, right? And then immediately on the second drive, the Colts are backed up into their own territory. And Anthony Richardson throws a pick six to a Bengals defender for a 14-yard return there. And that's when kind of everything has to come back down to earth a little bit. So, this was a game for Richardson where you could look for anything to confirm any biases you had, positive or negative. But despite there being a lot of negative and, a lot of people are kind of running with that tonight, I do think we have to look at this carefully. So let's just kind of lay the groundwork here. So Anthony was 8 of 14 passing, which is 57%. He did have some big completions to Alec Pierce, had a couple of them, A.D. Mitchell, and then Kylan Granson as well. The ones to Alec Pierce I thought were really nice because the first one was like an 18-yard chunk, then he got a 13-yard one. So a couple first downs to Pierce over the middle of the field. One of them was, a quick hot read while having someone, blinding in on his face. So that was good for him to get rid of the ball accurately and to get a good pickup. Some of the incompletions really could have gone either way. There was kind of a 50-50 ball to Drew Ogletree on the drive where they actually still got a touchdown to A.D. Mitchell. It would have been a tough catch by Ogletree, but it did hit him in the hand. So you can go either way with that. Perhaps he could have caught that. Michael Pittman did have a bad drop on a second down over the middle of the field, hit him right in the numbers. So that was second down. On third down, Anthony just absolutely skied it, just airmailed it to A.D. Mitchell. Just his feet were set and he didn't really have pressure. I think on that play, it just literally got away from him. I don't really think there's any explanation on that. But Pittman's drop led to that bad pass, and then the Colts had to punt. Later, there was another third down play where it was third and long, and Anthony was looking for A.D. Mitchell over the middle of the field. And on the surface, on the TV angle, I know it looked like a poor throw from Richardson. It was far ahead of Mitchell, but looking from up here, and then even explained further from Shane Steichen afterward. So Mitchell, right after he came out of his cut, he was kind of running a shallow post, but he was expecting to see a different coverage, and he was a little surprised by what Cincinnati had there. So he had just a slight hitch when he came out of his break. So he wasn't exactly where he was supposed to be. He should have been right there where the ball was in stride, able to catch it and keep running. So that kind of led to that incompletion. So a lot of these things tonight with Richardson and the pass catchers were miscommunications. The interception, the pick six with Kylan Granson, he thought Kylan was going to be going inside a little more. And that stuff, I guess you are glad to see that it's happening in the preseason. Hopefully not so much in the regular season. It's not been a great week in terms of communication between Richardson and the pass catchers. Even going back to Tuesday during the joint practice, there were a couple times where Anthony was under duress constantly during the practice, especially early in the first half, and he'd be getting rid of the ball, and the ball would be right there for the receivers, but they just weren't expecting it to be there already, and they weren't able to quickly, acclimate to the ball being right there and catch it. So I don't know what the deal is, because it's not been like that all summer, but over the last week, the communication has not been great. So with that not really being a theme throughout the summer, I don't quite know what to think about that. Maybe they're just going through a bad period right now. Maybe it's new stuff that has been added in recently that they're still working through and trying to kind of work out the kinks and find out. Everyone's trying to get used to where they're supposed to be on these certain plays. That's just stuff, we're never going to have all the answers to that, because it's not stuff that, Shane Steichen or anybody else is going to divulge in detail about it. If it gets to the regular season and we're still seeing that stuff, that'll be bad news and something we need to see them kind of work through. But in all, I think it was important to look at this performance and kind of, especially since it only lasted about a quarter and a half, a little over a quarter, kind of break it down individually into each instance of what went wrong. Because on the surface, if you're someone who is super skeptical about Anthony or just doesn't even like him outright as a player, you probably had a lot of things out of this that confirmed your views. But I'm trying to balance everything all together. I think there was some really good stuff. I thought the first drive when they went up tempo was great. I think that plays into his strengths. I think he's really comfortable doing that. The up tempo stuff, quick reads, get the ball out of his hands, just nice and fast. And, he's finding his guys in all areas of the field. So I think that's really productive for them, but it's also kind of finding that balance of how much you can use that, because you kind of gas the defense, but you're going to gas your own offensive players as well. So you can only do that so much. I know that was kind of a thing during the Andrew Luck era as well, where when they started doing that, it was super productive and they were putting points on the board, but you have to find that happy medium of how much can you do that. When it comes to Richardson, and that's a guy who you just keep having to give him reps because he's so inexperienced, I think you're just going to kind of have to live with some of the lumps there.
Stay up to date on the Indianapolis Colts by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Colts on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, does it matter that the Packers don't have a great fantasy pick at receiver? The Green Bay Packers have one of the youngest receiver rooms in the NFL. In fact, last year, it was the youngest pass catching group ever. Christian Watson and Jayden Reed will lead the way for the Corps in 2024, but not many are high on their options as fantasy potential players. Locked On hosts Michelle Majuk and Vinny Iyer started the offseason excited about Reed, but are now beginning to have questions about his potential production.
And then also Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed for the Packers going into his second season was a guy that we started this offseason very, very high on. But I think we're cooling off a little bit because we don't know how he's going to be used. I have him as my wide receiver 35. I do have him in the tier 5. So again, Rashee Rice is at the top there in my tier 5. Jayden Reed is at the bottom. You have Jayden Reed lower at wide receiver 36 here. So one spot lower than me, but you actually have them in tier 7. Your tiers are a little bit smaller than mine that you feel comfortable with. I do think Jayden Reed, though, has a super high ceiling. It's just how often will he be on the field if they just have 2 wide receiver sets? That's my worry.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern here because Dontavian Wicks has had a good preseason. You've got Christian Watson doing something to try to fix his hamstring for good. So if that works, his weird procedure, then he's not going to get hurt with the soft tissue and be out there. And it could totally be great. And he has a huge ceiling and he starts scoring touchdowns again and make big plays here, or he could just get hurt, right? That could just happen. So there's so many different outcomes for these guys. It's kind of like the Chief situation, but a lot scarier because I don't know how the pecking order is going to play out. And we've heard reports of all these guys doing well, these young receivers, the tight ends. So I don't know how it will play out. Was Reed more valued because Watson was out? Is it going to be more of a spread around passing game that Jordan Love has a year of starting under his belt? So there are a lot of questions. And I love Jayden Reed. I like the concept of Jayden Reed, but the situation is not fortunately in his favor at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's so weird because the second half of last season, he was so good, right? Weeks 10 through 18, he was the wide receiver 10 in fantasy points per game. He led the Packers in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns and rushing touchdowns from weeks 8 through 18. So it's like, why wouldn't they use him? He looked really good. I still have hopes for him, and he's going late enough. I'm willing to take a chance on him, but I'm not as high on him as I was to start the offseason.
I understand the concern. I really do. Except the rotation between Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, and Christian Watson is almost exclusively a boundary receiver problem when it comes to fantasy. When it comes to the Packers, it's not a problem at all. It is a feature, not a bug. But when the Packers are going to be 11 personnel in 3 receiver sets, there is really only one player who's going to play in the slot with any sort of consistency, and that is going to be Jayden Reed, which means Reed of that group is the only guy who doesn't have someone who he's going to have to rotate with on a regular basis. It could be Wicks and Watson, or Watson and Doubs, or Doubs and Wicks on the outside, but it will mostly, maybe only be Reed when it comes to receivers playing in the slot. And it is yet to be seen if the Packers are going to use tight ends, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, in the slot enough to eat into Jayden Reed's target share. We are, after all, talking about a player in Jayden Reed who just set the rookie record for receiving that was held by none other than Sterling Sharp with the Green Bay Packers. This is someone who does not have anyone to take his role away. And he is someone who, over the course of his career, has been exceedingly healthy. He has also been the guy that they scheme up touches more than anyone else. Low red zone, they are scheming up, whether it's an end around or a little swing route where you're clearing out a side. It's for Jayden Reed. He tied for the team lead last year in touchdowns, despite not being out targeted or not out targeting Romeo Doubs. So that tells you the opportunities are going to be there. And if Christian Watson is going to eat into anyone's target share, it's going to be Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks if Watson can stay healthy. And guess what? Watson has never stayed healthy in his NFL career, though it's only 2 years. Jayden Reed is the safest bet on a Packers offense, and it's going to be an awesome passing offense. So You can't go wrong, but Jayden Reed is the guy, the safest guy. And finally, Iowa has suspended head coach Kirk Ferentz for the Hawkeyes season opener after a self-reported recruiting violation. According to an Iowa press release, Ferentz committed a level 2 NCAA infraction by conducting improper communication with starting quarterback Cade McNamara and his family prior to entering the transfer portal. For how poorly the Hawkeyes offense has been under Ferentz, it's almost unsurprising Iowa had to do this to get a competent quarterback to transfer in. Frankly, I didn't know Kirk Ferentz had it in him. I thought he liked not being able to score. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, the NFL preseason will be kaput. It'll be done. It'll be over. It'll be time to talk NFL regular season. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.